but we'll get through. Today we're planning on doing tasks 1 through 14, or not 1 through 14 through 19. So we'll go ahead and hop on into that. So just like to welcome everybody to the 5th session of our North Carolina cohort. So just kind of a quick agenda for today's session. Go through tasks 14 through 19 in today's content, as I mentioned before, and then we'll look at the training schedule and then any resources, just like normal. Oh, and again, we'd like to thank Duke Energy for sponsoring this cohort. All right, so you guys already know this. Again, this is the North Carolina 50,001 ready cohort for 2023. And we're going to have, this is the 5th of 8 sessions, of 8 2-hour webinar sessions that we're going to do. Just quick housekeeping, like always. Please make sure that your surroundings are safe. If you're driving, please be in hands-free mode. If you're in a building, make sure that you know your exit paths. And if you're at home, please make sure there are no distractions. You're welcome to ask questions at any time during the webinar. Just feel free to unmute yourself if you are not asking questions, though we do ask that you keep your mic muted. That way we can have the best sound quality for participants and also for the recordings. And again, we will be recording these webinars, and by staying on the line and attending the meeting, you are giving consent to being recorded. Afterwards, we will send out a link to the recordings for everybody to be able to watch Again, we've already talked about this before. These are the participants in this year's cohort, and as you can see, we're kind of all over the state. And so just kind of jumping into a review of the previous sessions. Again, this is the same list of acronyms that we've talked about before. And we've talked about this before, how, we're kind of all starting here within the training. Some people are choosing to move to this ready recognition, or everyone's in the ready recognition cohort. Some are choosing to possibly get certified or ready recognized later. And the further up you go on this path, the more effort it requires and the more resources. Talked about SEM before. Just as a reminder, we're here to help people get from wherever they are to wherever they want to go. Not everybody is going to try to get this SEP. In fact, I don't think anybody in this year's cohort is looking to be superior energy performance certified, but just start wherever you're at and improve from there. And that's really all we're looking to do with this cohort. So previously, we had gone through the planning section over the last couple sessions, and we got through tasks 8 through 13. And as part of that, we really helped create these 2 key pie charts of understanding your energy performance and figuring out where, what energy is coming onto your site and where it's all going. And so we were able to kind of answer these questions. We figured out what our SEUs were. We worked through coming up with those energy performance indicators and baselines, and we kind of got into those objectives, energy targets, and that action plan as well. We started creating that energy mapping template, and if anybody has any questions about that energy mapping template tool that we provided, we're here to help. Just let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything that you need help with. You don't have to use the template that we provided. You can use your own as well. That's just a source that we had helped create for anybody to use. And then, we had talked about kind of that energy policy pyramid. We talked about the policy, the objectives, the targets, and then as part of task 13, we kind of talked about those action plans. Now that action plan can help you reach those targets, and those targets help support the objectives, and the objectives will support that policy. And then we kind of touched on this a little bit, but the bigger picture, looking at the whole, all of the planning tasks 8 through 13 as a whole, and you have the policy, the objectives, targets, the action plans, and today we're actually going to get into the operational controls, and so those will help you with those action plans. So up to this point, we've gone through tasks 1 through 13, and does anybody have any questions or anything that they wanted to talk about for tasks 1 through 13 before we get into today's content?
I think we might be okay at the moment. I do feel like at some point we may want to just discuss a few things about um, some of the lighting aspects. We were able to find a listing of all of our lighting ballasts and all that stuff. So we may just want to have a quick little sidebar discussion later.
Okay, not a problem. All right, so as I mentioned, today we're going to go through tasks 14 through 19. So tasks 14 through 19 will cover both the support and the operations sections. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hop on in as we get to this. So this is really, the point of this is engaging others. And so you want to make sure that you integrate your energy policy, or your integrate energy as a priority across the whole site. So you want it to be part of those policies and objectives, but it also needs to be a part of training, the context, legal, even procurement and design need to be a part of, have an understanding of energy as a priority. Your operators and maintenance technicians and just general employees. You want to make sure that you're engaging all the other functions and it's not just the energy team that's a part of this. And so as you can see here, it really is help from everybody. This is not just a one-man team thing. So for support, there are 3 tasks and we'll go through them today, but really you just kind of want to ensure that all the team members who impact your energy performance understand their role. And there's kind of 2 levels of support and awareness that we'll get into, but you want to make sure everybody on site, whether they're an employee or a contractor, that they're aware that you have an energy policy. But then for those people that are actually working on your significant energy users that might be having an impact on those, you want to make sure that they have a deeper training and deeper understanding. So through these 3 tasks, we'll look to answer, who impacts energy performance and your ENMS. Are they aware, competent, trained, and have we documented that information? Is our training effective, and do we maintain good documentation and records? So we'll hop right into task 14. So task 14 is all about competence and training. So for task 14, we ensure the competence of personnel whose work affects our energy performance in ENMS. We evaluate for effectiveness of actions taken to acquire competence, and we retain appropriate records of those competence and training and train. So what is competence? What does competence in a role mean? So, the first thing we want to look at is who requires competence. Maybe some other questions, maybe what are specific tasks this function performs. So depending on what your SEU is, what are some of those tasks that the person who's working on it would have to perform regularly? What is automated versus what is really dependent on an individual? And how is performance assessed in this role? So the standard itself defines competence as the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. So we're going to hop into a quick little interactive um, task. So I want you to think about this rooftop HVAC system. It's pretty standard. Other than weather, what could affect the energy consumption of this HVAC unit? Um, Thinking more of like what people what are things that people could do to impact the HVAC's energy performance in this scenario? feel free to unmute yourselves and just say what comes to mind.
I think by constantly changing the temperature back and forth.
Yes. Yes, that is a great example.
Things like preventative maintenance for like filters and, lube points and things like that can dramatically improve the efficiency.
Yep. Yep. Anyone else have any other thoughts? Those were the two main ones that I had. All right, yeah. So, the things that I had kind of written down, I had operation and scheduling. So, I think constantly changing the temperature kind of falls into both of those. And then I also had maintenance. So, those are some great examples of things that would impact. Now, who would have an impact on that? Anyone have any thoughts on who can impact the energy performance of this?
I'd imagine maintenance, and even just, everyday employee, the people who are changing the thermostat for whoever have access to it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what I had. I had HVAC technicians or the maintenance personnel, whatever you want to call them, and then whoever is over there hitting that thermostat. So yeah, so those are some great examples of just how you would impact the HVAC system here. So thinking about that, who needs competence? We mentioned the HVAC technicians. But maybe you have different SEUs. Maybe boilers is one of your SEUs, so boiler technicians. Maybe you have a specific process that you decided is your SEU on site. Those process operators. But then also energy team members, people collecting data. And there might be some other people that we really haven't thought of. But just kind of keep in mind that, any functions who impact the energy performance in your EMS, including those that work directly with your significant energy users, your energy performance indicators, operations and maintenance, data collection, etc. Those are the people that need to have some level of competence. So ensuring competence. How can you establish that there is competence? So the standard itself has 4 ways that they like to think about competence. And so you can have competence through education. Maybe you require a certain degree for the job. Training, having people that are having specific classes that someone must attend and pass to be able to hold the job. Skills, have they attained, are they able, maybe you require someone to obtain a specific certification. So maybe your boiler operators have to go through a very specific training and have that certificate. Or experience, and just requiring a specific number of years working in a particular area to be able to hold that job. And so those are just 4 examples of competence. And then you want to make sure, how can you ensure the competence is maintained? So you just want to make sure that you can perform, that maybe you link performance to your employee evaluation, energy performance to your employee evaluations, or can trainings be held for all relevant employees regularly? Maybe you have an annual training and you can kind of include that for all the people that need it, or, create some kind of tracking system for certifications or classes, just somewhere where you can maintain that. And so these are all just examples of things, or some things to kind of think about on how you can make sure that you're ensuring that those employees that do have an effect on your SEUs, or anyone that needs competence, is competent. And so this is really about making sure that you're helping the employees get to where they need to be. And so, one thing we've seen before is kind of a training maintenance, a matrix, or some kind of spreadsheet that kind of keeps a record of who has what trainings, and when they're due, maybe for going back and getting kind of a re-up on the class or whatever. And that's something that HR generally has a way of tracking. if not specifically for energy related, they probably have some kind of way of tracking it for other, maybe, for example, RIT requires us to take classes quarterly. And so they kind of have a matrix created of who's taken what IT training classes. And so then they know, and if you don't take it, you get a little email that's like, hey, you haven't taken this quarter's training yet, which is why I always take it on the first day that they send out the email, because otherwise I forget until the last day. So, just kind of a way of keeping track of that. So we're just going to go ahead and hop on over to the navigator real quick. So, can everybody see this okay?
Yep.
All right. So, we're here for task 14. Task 14, we ensure the competence of personnel whose work affects our energy performance and energy management system. We evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken to acquire competencies. We retain appropriate records for competencies and training. Again, here, this getting it done, it's going to be very, very similar. You just want to determine the necessary competencies for personnel and evaluate their current competencies. Then you want to identify if there's any gaps in the competencies of the personnel whose work affects the energy performance and your energy management system, and conduct training to address any competency gaps. And then you're going to evaluate the effectiveness and actions taken, and finally, you're going to retain those records. So you might notice that the navigator changed a little bit. They did have an update very, very recently, and so everything's pretty much the same. There is an additional tab here of optional guidance, and here, if you checked any of those extra boxes, they'll show up here. So just a note, if you hop in here and you go, wait a minute, this looks a little different, the navigator was updated recently. So in here, when we hop on over to full description, I've highlighted a couple of things that I think are kind of helpful, but identifying personnel who affect your energy performance in ENMS. In here, it gives a very exhaustive list of who you might want to consider, and whose work might or most likely affects your energy performance in your ENMS. And I touched on them briefly, but it just kind of gets into the details a little bit more. People whose work associated with those significant energy users, but even getting down into like purchasing or maybe design. So this is just kind of a helpful list here to look at. And then here, determining the necessary competencies and evaluate the current competencies of these personnel. And so here again, it just talks about education, training, skills, and experience, and then some questions to consider. So just kind of thinking about, how does your organization currently determine what individual employees and contractors need to know or need to have in order to perform a specific job? Who decides competency requirements and who's involved in this process? Is there documented information on this? If so, where is it located and who controls that information? And do these competencies requirements include what energy related information employees need to know? And so these are just some things to ask yourself. You probably already have some of this set up. Most companies do require some trainings somewhere along the way. So the question is really, what do you already have, and how can you leverage what you already have to add in this energy related information as well? And then there's some other things, it gives a very brief thing talking about evaluating the effectiveness of the action. So maybe if you have an on-site job training and you got your on-site job training, and you go through and you look at it at the end of the year and you go, well, that the training that we did might not have been as effective as we thought. Maybe you go back in and you tweak it, and you come up with some things that might be a little bit more helpful. And so, just making sure that you look at the trainings or the actions that you've decided to take and make sure that they are effective. And if they're not, go back to the drawing board and come up with something new. I'm gonna hop over to the playbook real quick. So as we mentioned before in the beginning of the playbooks, this top part right here is the same thing as the getting it done that we saw in the navigator. And so in here, it's got some great tables. And so you can use these tables as a way to keep track of all this if you don't already have a tracking system. But in here, the first thing they did was the first table, it helps to determine the necessary competencies for personnel and evaluate their current competencies. And so in this table, you've got the person, and here they did it by job title, not specific person. Needed competencies, and list all the things that they would like to have for that job, and then record the competencies. And here you current certifications, and then maybe some trainings, and then you say you can select if it's in place or if there's a gap for each of the competencies over here. So maybe in here you want to have in this case, they wanted all of their resource energy managers to have the certified energy manager training. And so you want to make sure that they're all CEMs. And maybe most of them are, but maybe you have one or two that are not. So you would say that there's a gap there. And then you would work to close that gap. So if you do have maybe a certification that you want to require that some of your employees have, but others don't, just making sure that you help those others get that certification. And so again, this is a nice little table that you can kind of set up. So task number 2 is identifying any gaps in competence and competencies of personnel whose work affects your energy performance and the ENMS and any trainings that might be needed to address those competency gaps. And so here it's, you want to be able to say that you've that training gaps for all of your facilities, SEUs, and other relevant ENMS elements have been identified, and the specific steps have been taken to ensure the relevant personnel are brought up to the competency level required for their job. And I believe Mike Stowe might have changed this, which is why it's in red. But just make sure that you also record that information. When we get to task 16, we'll talk about that a lot. And then in here, it gives you some room to say, to type out and explain what you did. And then finally down here, there is kind of a training metrics that's in here that you can use for helping you kind of retain the records of those competencies. And so this is where they put the actual person, John Doe, his job title, and how they relate to the SEU, what the training requirement was when they took the class. In here they have the approving supervisor, and then when the next training needs to happen, and then lastly looking at the effectiveness of that action. And so in here there's a nice little training I cannot say that word today, matrix, that you can use to kind of help keep track of any of those necessary actions that were required for filling those gaps. And so this is just a quick example. Again, these are Word documents. You can change this. Maybe you don't want to have approving supervisor. You could just delete this column, or maybe you want another column in here that you can add as well. And then finally, you just really want to be able to say, that you've done this, when those trainings were, and then have top management review it. And so that's really all there is to task 14. It's just making sure that you provide people with the training that they need, if they need any training. And so, are there any questions about task 14?
I'm good.
All right. I'm gonna hop on into task 15 then. So task 15 is awareness and communications. So as part of task 15, our personnel and on-site contractors are aware of our energy policy and their energy related roles and responsibilities, and that we have a process in place for internal and any applicable external ENMS communication. And so, before I mentioned, you want to make sure that the people who work on those significant energy users really have a good understanding. But again, you want to make sure that everybody is aware of your energy policy, everybody is aware of the ENMS, because everybody at the end of the day has some effect on your energy performance. If they're on site, there's no way that they're not affecting it. They might not have a huge effect on it, but they are affecting it in some ways. So again, it's just important to make sure that everyone is at least aware of the energy policy and aware of your energy management system. But, some employees might need a much deeper level of awareness, and we'll get into that in a second. So one of the big things that I like about ISO 50001 and the 50001 ready system is that communication starts at the top. And so really it's all about leadership. You want to make sure leadership is communicating the importance of an effective energy management, and that and of conforming to your ENMS requirements. You're gonna have leadership provide an initial message that kind of talks about the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how of your ENMS. And you really want to make sure that this is a very broad communication. And then again, as I mentioned before, you're going to provide a much deeper message to those key effective personnels. And because they're going to have a bigger potential impact. So they need to know more. And so the reason I really like this is because, it's one thing to just say, hey, I'm going to require this and walk away and not really be a part of it. But if leadership is providing that communication from the beginning and then continually communicating it, which we'll talk about in a minute, it really kind of helps to let the employees know that this is actually something that's important, and it's something that they need to consider. And it to me, it just it provides kind of less lip service and more of a, this is something that we're a part of and this is something that's important to us type of message. And so that's one thing that I really like about ISO. And we've seen it before, we've talked about it before with other tasks as well. Really that your leadership is driving the ship on this and on the messaging. So as part of task 15, you want to make sure that communications are ongoing. You don't want to tell everybody, hey, we have an energy management system now, here's our energy policy, and then walk away and never mention it again. Because, a week later, 6 months later, a year later, no one's going to remember that communication that you said once and then you didn't bring back up. So it's important to kind of have ongoing communications. And so some ideas for ongoing communication topics, it doesn't have to be an everyday thing, but maybe having some information about your energy policy reiterated after a while at a meeting, or maybe talking about the importance of energy management. Again, energy management responsibilities, maybe talking about those energy objectives that you're going towards, or looking at energy performance successes. And so, after that after that, first kind of initial communication, you want to make sure that you're kind of bringing it back up and talking about it again. One very, very important thing is that you have to have a method for employees and contractors to be able to provide kind of input on that ENMS. And so, maybe it's an actual physical suggestion box, maybe it's a online system where someone can go in and fill out one of those online polling questions if they have an idea or something. But just some kind of suggestion box is a requirement as part of ISO 50001. So it's really important to make sure that you have that in suggestion box. And so, some things that we've seen that are helpful in the past with that is I've seen incentives where they kind of have almost like a contest where people can put in their ideas, and if it's something that the energy team thinks is actually going to be really helpful and something that they want to implement, they give like $5 or $10 gift card to something, nothing huge, but just kind of a way to incentivize people that if they do come up with ideas, to make sure that they are submitting them. And then it's something that you can later communicate as an energy performance success. So you can point out like, hey, Bob suggested that we convert all of our lights to LEDs. We did it. We saw a 20% energy reduction in our lighting energy use. And, this all came from Bob's suggestion in our online suggestion poll. And it's a great way to not only highlight that you have that suggestion poll and remind people about it, but also highlighting that energy performance success and then reminding people that ongoing communication. Some other ways that we've seen people kind of address the ongoing communication thoughts is having a lot of companies will have communication boards or some kind of maybe a TV in a break room that kind of goes through and talks about different things going on in the company. So it might mention the upcoming barbecue that you guys are doing. And then next thing it'll talk about is, reminding people to stay hydrated during the day. And maybe another thing that could pop up would be something about the energy policy and just kind of having it so that it kind of slides through and shows up and is part of it. We've been on sites where they talk about it during the weekly meetings. So when they have their quick little team huddles before everyone goes out on the manufacturing floor, they talk about different things. And so, one day they talk about safety, the next day they talk about energy, just kind of like quick little 5 minutes added in before everybody goes out and does what they're going to do on the floor for that day. And so just kind of ways to come up with. Another thing we've seen people do is actually include it on the employee's badge. And so they'll have the energy policy on the back of the badge. And so it's always there with every employee so they are aware of it. And so those are just a few things. I mean, I'm sure you guys could come up with a million other ideas, but those are just some things that we've seen when we were on some sites. So task 15 is really short and sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and hop on over to the navigator. So for task 15, it's awareness and communication. Our personnel and on-site contractors, importantly, on-site contractors, not just your personnel, are aware of our energy policy and their energy-related roles and responsibilities. We have processes in place for internal and any applicable external energy management system communications. I know I didn't mention that before in the slides. It does talk about if you do decide to communicate it externally, normally there's not a lot of external communications about the system. So kind of the steps here for getting it done. You want to develop and deliver an initial energy management system communication that comes from top management that includes the importance of energy management and the organization's energy policy. Then you're going to develop the detailed ENMS awareness training for specific personnel and departments. Then you want to plan and implement awareness training, conduct awareness training and retain those records. And then plan and implement your internal communication process of the ENMS, including that suggestion system. And then finally, plan and implement any external communication. So hopping on over to full description. So here, we talk about develop and deliver that initial communications. And so in those early stages, you want to make sure that you announce your organization's commitment to energy performance improvement, announce the undertaking of your ENMS implementation, broadly communicate that the energy policy, encourage active participation and input by employees, and set the stage for ongoing energy-related communication. And so here it talks a little bit more about that initial communication and information that can effectively deliver this message and just kind of making sure that as you're writing that message that you're able to answer these questions and clearly answer these questions to allow your employees to really understand why it's important. And And then we're going to hop down here into these communicate internally. And so here it talks about some methods for communicating internally. I mentioned a few, but here's some other ideas or thoughts. Internal newsletters, your intranet site, maybe emails, are just a few other thoughts as well. And then it gives some ideas on topics of what you want to communicate. Again, not every communication needs to include all of these, but maybe in a year, or maybe over the course of a year, you want to make sure you've included all of these. And so these are just some kind of thoughts on that communicating internally. And then it talks about some key effective EMS internal communication processes. And then finally, it mentions that suggestion system. And in here, it gives some ideas to help incentivize or maybe some rewards. Again, I mentioned before, monetary gift cards, we've seen that. Um, the idea of a designated parking space for a month. Someone comes up with a great suggestion and they get the primo parking space right next to the door for the month. Kind of like the employee of the month type parking spot. Whatever works for you guys. And these are just, some thoughts and some things to consider. And then finally, it does mention that if you decide to communicate externally, it talks about what to consider for that as well. I'm going to hop on into the playbook here. So again, this part up here is the same as the getting it done that we saw before. And then first thing you want to do is you're going to develop and deliver your initial EMS communication that comes from top management. You want to be able to say, we've delivered our initial communication about our EMS, and we've communicated with top management the content we would like them to communicate. And so you want to just be able to say that, yes, you've done those both things. And then here it talks about developing that awareness training, and it talks about what awareness is, and that we've ensured the communications address awareness of the following, and then you want to make sure it includes your energy policy, the importance of the EMS procedures and requirements, roles, responsibilities, etc. And you want to be able to say that you've included all of those things. It talks about plan and implement your awareness training, and then there's some forms below that you can use to help with that as well. You're going to conduct awareness training and retain those records. We'll talk about retaining records in a second. And then plan and implementing internal communication process for your EMS, including that suggestion system. And so in here, if we're kind of scrolling down, there's this nice little table that you can use to help with that communication planning worksheet. So in this table here for your, you can come up with communicate to whom. So who are you trying to send this communication to? What are you trying to communicate? Who's going to do the communication? Person in charge? What media will be used to communicate? Or is it going to be just brought up during a meeting? Is this something that's going to go out to everybody via the email? Whatever it is. And then how often will this type of communication occur? And so, maybe once quarterly, Bob will send out an email to everybody to talk about the energy performance improvement. And so, this is just a great way you can kind of come up with this planning idea and worksheet through this table. And again, it's a Word document. You can add columns, delete columns, whatever works for you guys. In here, it gets into the external communication. I'm not going to talk about this too much because, again, we don't really see this happening very often. But it is here. And if you do have any questions about this section, feel free to reach out to us. Again, if you scroll on down, there's some more tables to just kind of help you keep track of that. And so there's this nice little matrix here for planning for this awareness topic and how you're going to get this information out. And so in here, they've got different awareness topics and then different communication topics. Who on site needs to know this? So first topic we have here under the awareness topic is your energy policy. Who needs to know this? Persons who work under the organization's control. So not only your employees, but also any contractors that come out onto your site. And then when is this done? Your EMS, when your EMS starts, and then annually, you're going to provide updates. And then the reference document here, we just kind of, Mike's gone in and put where in the standard exactly this information came from. And so there's a whole bunch of these. Mike has nicely gone through the standard and found where they're all referenced in the standard of what topic needed to be communicated or what awareness topic is necessary. And then if it does reference a playbook as well, he'll reference that. And so Mike's done a great job of already kind of helping set up that if you would like to look at it. And then there's this EMS training needs planning matrix. That's kind of a mouthful, but again, this is another kind of table that you can use of what training is needed, who needs the training, what information is needed, what your EMS documents, if any, are involved, who's responsible for conducting the training, how or where will this training be done, when will the training be done, and what will be used to record the training. And so in here it's got various trainings, and so we'll look at this first one, just a general EMS awareness and overview. And so that's the first training. And who needs this training? Persons doing work under the DWB control, the staff, technicians, contractor, supplier, etc. And then it lists some more people as well. What information is needed? Your energy policy, scope and boundaries, how they impact and contribute to your EMS and energy performance. Pretty much just a quick overview of everything related to 50,001 that we've been talking about. Who's responsible for conducting the training? You've got your, in this case, they were looking at the energy team leader or the resource energy managers. Where will this training be done? Classroom training or maybe a webinar. When will the training be done? They decided to do it annually in October, and then keeping a record of the training and just having that attendance roster. And so in here, they talk about various different trainings. And then finally, just having top management review this task. So that's all I really have for task 15. Does anyone have any questions? I know I went through that kind of quickly. All right. So we're going to hop on into task 16. Task 16 is all about documentation. And as I've kind of briefly touched on in today's webinar and before, the standard does require that you document that information. So as part of task 16, we have documented information, and we determined is needed to ensure the EMS effectiveness and demonstrate energy performance improvement, as well as that required by the guidance of the 50,001 Ready Navigator. We have processes in place for creating, updating, and controlling our documented information. And so one thing we like to say is think about this as just kind of, when we get to it later, we'll talk about internal auditing. And so everything for task 16 is you really want to be able to show the information. And so Mike likes to say, think about this as the state of, think about this like Missouri. It's the show me state. You want to be able to show somebody that you have that documentation in place. So some quick kind of key terms to think about. According to the standard, a document is information that guides an action or communicates an expectation, whereas a record captures the activities performed as evidence of that activity. And so we'll talk about it quite a bit, but the standard itself has this term documented information, and that is information required to be controlled and maintained by the organization and the medium in which it's contained on. And so think about it as, if it's a blank form, It's a document, but once you've filled out that form, it becomes a record. And so you just want to be able to maintain all of that. And so, as I mentioned before, you want to have records that people attended trainings. You want to be able to show that people have the necessary competencies to perform the job. These are all things that in the standard are required to be documented information. And so just kind of keeping that in mind as we go through this. So ISO 50001 tells you exactly what needs to be documented. It uses that term, documented information, and it actually appears in the standard 18 times and says, quote, shall retain documented information, see 7.5. Some of those locations, it talks about the scopes and boundaries, your energy policy, objectives and targets, action plans, methods and criteria used to develop energy review and its results, etc. And so really there's a lot of things that you need to be documenting, and you want to make sure that you have that information well retained so that when you're doing those internal audits and that auditor asks, hey, can you show me record that you do have that suggestion box and you've gone through the suggestions that people have put in, you're able to go through and you're able to pull it up and say, all right, here's my suggestion box, here's what we received, here's the things we went through with. And so again, you just want to be able to have that information documented and be able to access it when asked for it. We're going to go ahead and hop on over to the navigator. Again, there's not really too much to this task either. It's pretty straightforward. So in here, task 16, documenting the ENMS. We document information we determine is necessary to ensure energy management system effectiveness and demonstrate energy performance improvement, as well as that's suggested by the guidance of the 50001 Ready Navigator. We have processes in place for creating, updating, and controlling our documented information. And in here, for the getting it done, you want to ensure that your energy that your energy management system includes the documented information suggested by the guidance of the 50001 Ready Navigator for processes implemented to this point. As you continue your ENMS implementation, add the other required documented information. Determine what additional documented information you need to ensure the effectiveness of the ENMS and to demonstrate energy performance improvement. List your ENMS documents, assign the document owner and document approvers. And define your relevant document controls. Make your document owners responsible for conformance with the controls for the documented information to maintain, i.e. those are your documents. List your ENMS records, assign record owners, define relevant record controls. Make record owners responsible for conformance with the controls for the documented information to be retained, i.e. that's just keeping track of your records. And then if your organization has an existing process for controlling the documents and records, customize it as necessary to meet the documentation needs for your ENMS. If your organization has an existing records policy, make sure that the controls implemented for ENMS records are consistent with the requirements of that policy. Really, all it's saying is don't recreate the wheel. If you already have a way of controlling documents and records, you can use that. Just make sure that what you're doing meets the intent of the standard. And if it doesn't, just tweak it a bit so that it does. I'm sure most of you guys have a way of retaining documents and records, and hopefully it's a good one, and that it's not a little bit of a mess, but I have definitely worked at places where the file system is a mess, and I've worked at places where the file system is amazing. And so, just if you have, just follow what your company already does. Don't recreate the wheel. Just if you need to tweak it in any way, just make sure you have those minor tweaks. So when you want to determine the necessary EMS documents, again, we talked about it before. It's stated in the guidance, in the navigator guidance. We can look back here at task 14, retain appropriate records of competency. It's there. It tells you. Just make sure that you have that information, both your documents and your records. It gives you some great examples of what generic documents might be, thinking about your policy, maybe procedures, operational procedures, etc. And then it talks about some examples of what records are and thinking about reports, that data analysis, maybe some meeting minutes from your energy team meetings, whatever it might be. Just kind of keeping track of those and making sure that if it is required to be documented or required to be recorded, that you have those records or documents. And then in here, it talks about determine the documented information needed for your organization and its EMS. And in here, it's got a lot of drop downs, but it talks about your organization decides what additional documented information is required for your EMS based on your own needs. This means that you have both the flexibility and responsibility to determine what documented information is needed to ensure the effective implementation and operations of your EMS and to demonstrate the energy performance improvement. So some things to kind of think about: what is the value of the documented information, and talks about here what to keep in mind. What general factors affect the extent of documentation within the organization. Talks about some things that you might need to keep in mind. When do you decide what additional EMS documentation is needed? How do you decide what additional EMS documentation is needed, and what are the successful factors for documented information? And so it's just a lot of additional guidance and some information, some questions to kind of keep in mind as you're going through task 16. The playbook for task 16 is here. Again, it's the same idea as what we talked about before, that getting it done. And so here, sorry, I scrolled a little too far. You've got ensure that your EMS includes the documented information suggested by the guidance. And so you just want to check existing documentation. You want to be able to say, yes, we have included all suggested documentation. And in this case, they said we use the playbook worksheets to ensure that we've documented all the EMS decisions and processes. And so these playbooks are a great way to kind of keep track of that documentation to make sure that you have documented everything that's required. For the next step, you want to determine what additional documented information you need to ensure the effectiveness of your EMS and to demonstrate your energy performance improvement. So you want to be able to say that we reviewed our documented information and considered any additional information. And in here, they said the additional information of we conduct this activity monthly with our team meetings where we discuss the EMS implementation and the status as a larger group. Then you want to be able to say that you've listed your EMS documents, assign the document owners and document approvers, etc. And so in here, if you download this particular playbook, you'll notice that it doesn't really match. Mike's actually gone through and added some stuff to this table to kind of help keep track of this a little bit better. But there's this nice table in here in this example playbook where it talks about the what. So in here we've got the first one is scope and boundaries, the type. In here they decided to use playbook and pictures. Who's the owner of that? In this case, it's the energy team leader. Who's approving it? In this case, it's the director of public works. And then finally, the playbook number. And so it talks about that's in playbook 3. And then location. And so in here, Mike has gone through and created this table. It talks about all the different things that need to be documented, all of those 18 locations in the standard, what its reference goes to in terms of the playbook, and then location. This column here is really just, you can put the file path in here. If you are still working with paper, you can put the location of the of where you keep that, but I think in this day and age, most people, everything's electronic. So you can just put the file path in here so someone can just come in here and click. And then again, if you have any additional information that you decided to add, you can come down here and add that as well. So if we scroll on down, this next thing is if your organization has an existing process for controlling documents and records, you've customized it as necessary to meet the documentation for your EMS. Again, as I mentioned before, if you already have a system in place for a document control system, use that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, just make sure that it meets the intent. And so you just want to be able to say that we have determined whether the existing process for controlling documents and records and customize them as necessary for your EMS, and that we have determined whether we have an existing record policy and ensured that our EMS record control is consistent with our policy. And then top management review. And then you might have noticed down here, we've got this document owner. And so this is just a little stamp in here that some people have used for that document control to kind of keep track of what's changed. And so in here, your initial draft review, owner's initials, the date, maybe you make some changes to this document, then you would just kind of put in here, add in here the version 1.0 or 1.1, what changed. We added a note up here and then who was in charge of approving it. And so that's just one way that you could use to kind of keep that document control so that people know that they're in the latest and greatest version of it. That's really all I have for task 17. Are there any questions about task 16? Are there any questions about task 16?
I'm good.
All right. I'm going to hop on into the next set of 3 tasks, 17, 18, 19. So tasks 17, 18, and 19 are all about operation. So you want to operate, maintain, design, and procure to optimize that energy performance. So you want to make sure you kind of stay in that optimal energy band here. So some things to kind of keep in mind. Do I have good operational and maintenance controls for my SEU and action plans? Do my operators know what to do when energy expectations are not being met? And are design and procurement teams engaged? So for task 17, this is operational controls. This task has a lot to it. So for task 17, we plan and control the processes related to our SEUs and action plans, and set the operation and maintenance criteria where there are risks of significant deviations in energy performance. We operate the SEU and action plans or SEU and action plan related process in accordance with the criteria and communicate the criteria to relevant personnel. And we control planned changes along with we control planned changes along with outsourced processes related to SEUs. Sorry, that's a mouthful. So really operational controls. There's a lot to it, but just kind of keeping in mind that you want to make sure that you have a plan and controls processes related to both that SEU and those action plans that we talked about last time. So as part of task 17, operational controls and definitions. So operational controls are all the procedures, tools, and guidances that promote the efficient and uninterrupted function of the critical equipment. So kind of some examples, so looking at criteria and parameters, you've got operational criteria, which might be temperature, pressure, amperage. You've got maintenance criteria, thinking about changing out those air filters, making sure that your motors or bearings are lubricated, and then doing those vibration checks. Some examples of procedural or instruction, thinking about operation in terms of procedural instructions. You got your ovens startup and shutdown, maybe your paint booth downdraft or cooling tower operations. And then thinking about maintenance, leak repairs, cleaning, equipment, tuning and calibrations, or your preventative maintenance schedules. So just kind of some things to keep in mind. So you got your significant energy uses. We've talked about objectives and targets and how those affect that significant energy uses. You've got competence, training, and awareness, and how that affects it. Now we're going to touch on operational control and how that affects it. But just kind of keeping in mind that it's not just one of these things that affects that significant energy uses. It's all of them. They all kind of in some way affect it. So you want to determine what those appropriate controls are. So making sure that you have documented all your current official operating practices for each SEU. Then we recommend kind of mapping the process that mapping processes that the SEU that use your SEU or have related action plans for improvement. You want to identify opportunities for streamlining those SEU controls, and then you want to make sure that your operational and maintenance controls prevent any significant deviations in that energy performance. So in this graph here, we have an example of where we expect our SEU to be operating, and we expect it to kind of be between these two bands during the normal operations. And so you want to make sure that you stay in between those bands, because if you get out of it, this is going to be an example of a significant deviation outside of where you expected it to operate. So just kind of keeping that in mind. So kind of developing criteria for what those for what your operational controls might be, and kind of thinking about some stuff, looking at sources for those criteria, thinking about what kind of recommendations do the manufacturers make, looking at the system personnel or even operational manuals, including those automated controls. Do you have minimum process or system requirements? Looking at that service personnel suggestions, maybe operating and maintenance practices. Just kind of benchmarking your performance to similar equipment. Maybe you have 5 air compressors on site. Benchmarking how each of those 5 air compressors is operating, and making sure that they're all kind of similar. And if not, why might they not be similar? Thinking about guidance from energy system experts, maybe internal expert suggestions, or looking at past issues or problems. If you have a multi-site and your site in Durham is having issues with one of their chillers, and they found some ways to fix it with some operational controls so that they stop having that issue and so that it operates more energy efficiently, sharing that information with your other sites so that maybe in Raleigh, they know to go ahead and fix it before they have the problem without having to go through the issue, and just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind. It doesn't have to be just looking at equipment you have on one site. If you do have multiple sites, sharing that information from site to site, if you have similar equipment. And then, kind of an example of what criteria might be out there, looking at best practices for compressed air systems as laid out by that compressed air challenge. So thinking about some operational criteria and things that can kind of really impact that energy performance. Some of these things you might have control over, some of these things you might not have a lot of control over. Thinking about occupancy time, how long are people there and when are they there? Temperature, pressure, humidity, your control sequences, what your set points are. Just as kind of an example of operational criteria, kind of including common conditions, you might think about things like the pressure or temperature for a certain process. Maybe time and humidity really affect your processes as well. But there might be some other operating controls that you might need to consider. So maybe you're making plastic widgets and keeping in mind criteria like flow rate for getting the plastic out, or whatever it might be. Just kind of keeping those things in mind as you're doing this. What are those operating criteria that you need? Uh, sorry. So thinking about maintenance and definitions, the primary purpose of maintenance has traditionally been to maintain reliability and availability. However, you really want to kind of think about what effective equipment maintenance might also enhance that energy efficiency. Um, so one of the things that I've seen a lot is people kind of think about maintenance of HVAC equipment. And a lot of times, maybe there's some preventative maintenance, but more just kind of reactive maintenance. And so a lot of times when it comes to HVAC equipment from site to site, we'll get out there and we'll ask, well, when was the last time you guys changed the air filters? And maybe they don't change the air filters until suddenly they get a call that the unit's not working and they find that the filters have been sucked all the way into the unit because they were so dirty. That's just eventually what happened. Um, reactive maintenance undoubtedly will waste energy. And so kind of thinking about, instead of reactive, doing preventative maintenance, or even proactive maintenance, having something as simple as a little pressure indicator on each side of your air filter in a unit can tell you when you actually need to change that air filter and when it's dirty versus when it's clean. And so just kind of some things. The cost of energy is often going to be more, or the cost of the energy to run it very energy inefficiently will be more than the cost of the maintenance. But also those tend to be in different budgets. And then, you want to make sure that all of your significant energy users need to be maintained correctly, and you want this to apply equally to external service contractors. So talking about HVAC again, a lot of companies don't maintain their own HVAC. They have a third-party contractor that comes out there, and just making sure that the third-party contractor is very aware that, hey, energy efficiency is extremely important to our site. So I want to make sure that what you're doing is not only going to keep everybody comfortable inside and not have me have to call you because the unit died in the middle of August, but that I'm also not using more energy than I need to be. And so just kind of keeping that in mind. Again, I mentioned this with some of the other examples, but a lot of times we'll hear about deferred maintenance. And deferred maintenance is going to affect that energy performance in a very negative way. So just making sure that you've got the maintenance and those operational controls in place to help keep everything running as efficiently as possible. So maintenance criteria, some things that I mentioned before: filters, lubrication, tune-ups, and adjustments. Those are some things to kind of keep in mind. Maintenance factors, operating schedules, inspection methods and intervals, startup and shutdown frequency, severity of service. So things to kind of keep in mind: if your unit is turning on and off very frequently for whatever reason, it's going inevitably to need service more often than a unit that can just turn on and run and stay on, because of the wear and tear of starting and stopping. So, some examples might be to think about, some things to think about for tune-ups might be tune-up criteria, would be kind of frequency, set point for combustion air on a boiler, So maybe you're starting to see that the combustion air coming out of the boiler is showing that you're having more and more incomplete combustion, in which case that could be a sign that you need to do a tune-up on the boiler. Some other things to think about might be, for example, a adjustment on a damper on an air side economizer, or going through and having to reset the tension on a V-belt. And just making sure, kind of going through and making sure that those adjustments are right. Some things to kind of think about in terms of maintenance are going to be kind of variables that might influence that maintenance criteria. Again, if a unit is in a very dusty environment, like maybe you have an HVAC unit that's serving an area where there's a lot of sawdust for whatever reason, you're going to need to change the filters out more often than maybe an HVAC unit that's just serving the office space, just because inherently that filter is going to get more particles in it. So again, just some things to kind of think about. So in here, we kind of have a table of some document criteria and an example. So we talked about the boilers. In here, the parameter that they looked at was dissolved solids. They used parts per million. If the dissolved solids that are coming out of the boiler were outside of this upper or lower limit with using this specific piece of equipment, they needed to go in and check. You want to make sure that it's operating in between there. If it's outside of that limit that you've set, you need to go figure out why it's outside of that limit. And then because you have this measurement piece of equipment, they do require routine calibration of that measuring device. Again, looking at boilers, maybe the boiler pressure, in this case it's in bar. If the pressure gets outside of this limit, again, that be an example of, hey, we need to go figure out what's going on. And so these are just kind of setting that criteria of, this is where we expect our boilers to be operating. We expect the exhaust oxygen percent O2 to be between 3.5% and 2%. We expect our stack temperature to be no more than 300 degrees C. So these are just some examples in here of that criteria that we expect the boiler to be operating in. You want to communicate the controls that you have. So we've identified those SEU affected personnel multiple times, but for sure we identified them by the time we got to task 14. And so, we've identified them, then we provide on-site job or on-job training. You want to make sure that they have work instruction and operating procedures, provide them with necessary classroom training, give them a posted list of specific settings. So, again, we talked about this before. You've got a boiler operator. They need to know that the boilers should be operating within these limits. They need to know that we have a problem if our percentage of oxygen in the exhaust is greater than 3.5%. So making sure that they have this information. Having logbooks, and then just keeping track of where you are with that operation. And so, it's one thing to set those operational controls. We expect the boiler to be operating here. And then just communicating those, making sure that the people who do affect the boilers are aware of all those lists and have that information. So as part of task 17, implementing those operational controls. So thinking about it in terms of procedure-based, having a procedure or work instruction. So having that boiler operator, he's got this procedure, he's got his work instructions, he knows what this what the boiler should be doing, and has an instruction of how he's supposed to check everything when he gets in the morning. Then equipment logbooks, keeping track of that information. You got your preventative maintenance schedule, You got your equipment operating procedures and maybe some checklist or a bulletin board posting, just having that information procedure-wise. Thinking about it in terms of technology base, you've got your control system, you've got your your alarm/alert system. So, a lot of newer buildings these days have pretty sophisticated computer automated automation systems or building management systems, um, whatever you want to call it, where you can keep track of all this stuff. And then they have these alerts and alarms. And I've seen some where they'll even send text messages to the maintenance guy that says, hey, HVAC or RTU1 shut off because of a um, float valve alarm. And so the maintenance guy can go, oh, okay, I need to send somebody out there to look at that and figure out why the float valve is um, set off an alarm. And so, not everybody's system is as fancy as that. Those are the new fancy systems, but there are plenty of alarm systems out there that allow people to know. And so keeping track of those control systems, alarm systems, having those preventative maintenance systems. And then finally training base, just making sure that you've got maintenance training, operations training, contractor training, heck, even Better Plants does in-plant training. And so you probably already have a lot of these operational controls in place and just kind of leveraging them for your energy management. And so again, these are just kind of 3 different ways to look at it. You can look at it in terms of procedure-based, technology-based, and training-based. In most cases, it's not just going to be one or the other, but it's going to be some kind of combination of all 3 of these. So we kind of talked about operational control. We'll mention procurement in a minute, but then finally, this monitoring and measurement and analysis. And we're going to be using that, and we'll talk about it more a little bit later, but how that's going to kind of connect back to operational controls. And you want to make sure that you're using anything that you're monitoring and measuring and analyzing to kind of connect back and make sure that you are meeting those operational controls. As I mentioned before with those boilers, you want to make sure that they're operating between that 3.5% and 2%. And you're monitoring and measuring what the O2 out of that boiler is. And if it's outside of it, having a plan of what you're going to do when you're outside of that. And so, while the connections of your operational controls, competence and training, procurement, all that, just kind of thinking about how you might use how all of those will affect that significant energy uses and connecting that monitoring and measurement back to those operational controls. So as part of task 17, some of the barriers to effective operational controls to keep in mind. So you want to make sure that your operational controls are effective. And to do that, you want to make sure that they can be user friendly in the sense that they're easy to understand, easy to use, and easy to communicate. A lot of times what we'll see is, somebody who didn't have a great understanding of the piece of equipment wrote the controls and then gave them to the boiler tech. The boiler tech didn't really understand it, failed to ask any questions, and now the operational controls aren't being met. And so just, making sure that they are easy to understand, easy to use, and easy to communicate. You don't want anything that's not used, or you don't want to misapply any of those controls. Another thing to kind of think about with the operational control is maintenance. You want to set operating criteria. Setting that operating criteria is mandatory if the equipment, system, and processes are going to be used. These items, these items can be used without any defined maintenance criteria or operating controls. So just kind of making sure, again, you don't want to forget that to include maintenance as part of it. You want to be communicating often. If you don't communicate, if you have infrequent communications with those operational controls, people are going to forget. You want to make sure that you're telling employees and especially contractors. I know I keep bringing it up, but you got HVAC contract with, let's just say you use Brady Train to come out and look at all of your HVAC unit. You have a contract with them. You know, maybe every time Billy is the one that comes out and looks at it, but maybe it's not. Maybe they have a rotating group of people. So just making sure that you have frequent communications with the employees and the contractors about those operational controls, because you don't want Billy to be out and you have a problem and John shows up and John doesn't know about your operational controls and then makes some changes that don't fall within the controls that you're looking for. And so just making sure that you are communicating those operational controls often and that people are aware of it. You want to make sure that you're checking that your controls are effective regularly. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory, but it's easily forgotten about as well. So just kind of going back and checking that those controls are effective. Failing to improve ineffective controls. Maybe you find that the controls that you picked aren't great for whatever reason. Just making sure that you then come back to the table and go, okay, this didn't work. What else can we do? And then finally getting the culture and making sure you get all the staff behind this new system. A lot of times when you tell people, hey, we're gonna start tracking and keeping a logbook of what our boilers are doing. And so every morning you need to come in and log what's going on with the boilers. And people might not like having to add things to their job. And just kind of getting that staff accustomed to the importance of how doing it the new way and why it's important. We kind of talked about the bigger picture. We talked about this pyramid before, and we're going to talk about it again, and just how, again, these operational controls help kind of build up those action plans. Those action plans build up the energy targets. Energy targets builds up that objective, and then finally the policy being this top little itty bitty piece, and operational controls being kind of that bottom base to hold the whole pyramid up. So you really want to make sure you've got a nice broad base to hold your to hold up your energy success pyramid. So I'm gonna hop into a quick polling question. Lisa, if you want to go ahead and launch the first polling question. Thinking about the energy success pyramid on the previous slide, how would you rate the strength of your organization's pyramid? You're on a rock solid, you're on a solid rock, nearly complete. You're on a solid rock and a work in progress. We have found a solid rock and are working on the foundation. We're still digging the foundation and looking for that solid rock. Or it looks like a pyramid, but a strong wind could take us out. All right. It looks like we've gotten quite a few responses. A lot of you guys are in the either we've found a solid rock and are working on the foundation, or we're still digging, and that's fine. We did have one response of you're on a solid rock and nearly complete, so that's great to hear, unless that was Mike Stowe, in which case, Mike, I see you. But yeah, so it's great to see, I just want to say a lot of people right now are going to be in that phase of, I thought so. Most people are going to be in between we found a solid rock and are working on the foundation, and you might still be digging, looking for that, but it's great. We can work towards, and we can help you guys strive towards the, getting that solid rock in place and getting a little bit further along. So We'll go ahead and hop on over to the navigator real fast. And so for task 17, we talked about operational controls. We plan and control the processes related to our SEUs and action plans, and set operation and maintenance criteria where there are risks of significant deviation in energy performance. We operate the SEU and action plan related to the processes in accordance with the criteria and communicate the criteria to relevant personnel. We control planned changes along with outsourced processes related to SEUs. So first thing you're going to do is create your SEU operational criteria worksheet and operational controls checklist to determine and set those required criteria for controls for each of your SEUs. Then you want to ensure the critical factors affecting the energy performance. You want to ensure that critical factors affecting energy performance are known and communicated to responsible personnel. You want to ensure that operational and maintenance control sections of your action plans have been completed and implemented. Then you want to operate and maintain sites, equipment, systems, or processes associated with your SEU to meet the determined criteria. You want to establish the processes to control planned changes and affecting operational and maintenance criteria or controls. And then finally, you want to control outsourced SEU or processes related to your SEU. So again, just because Brady Train is maintaining your HVAC, it does not mean you don't have to have operational controls for it. So looking at, in here, first thing I wanted to look at was setting operating and maintenance criteria. And so, your organization should have effective operating and maintenance criteria in place for all your major sites, equipment, systems, and processes. And so thinking about your SEUs, you want to make sure they have optimal running conditions and maintenance practices. So talks about some operating criteria examples, things to kind of think of: occupancy timer settings, HVAC temperature controls, maybe your line speeds for your pieces of equipment or your widgets that you're making. Sorry. So just things to kind of think about. So when thinking about operating criteria are implemented through your operational controls for processes related to your SEUs and action plans. Some examples of operational controls could be, physical limits, mechanical or electrical controllers, your measuring equipment, your operator competence and training, some things to just kind of think about. And then again, here, your organization must address your maintenance, criteria and associated controls. Some things to kind of think about when in terms of maintenance, those filter replacements, lubrication, leak repairs, etc. So these are just kind of a nice list of things that you want to make sure are included. There really is a lot to this task. As you kind of come down here, it also has some more information for sources to help identify operating and maintenance criteria. We talked about manufacturer recommendations or industry standards, but also, just talking to personnel who measure the performance of the equipment, or the service personnel suggested operating settings and maintenance intervals, talking to the people that actually work on the pieces of equipment. And then, it's also got some information here for evaluation of your operating and maintenance criteria. Again, it's just some things to kind of keep in mind as you go through this task. If we hop on down here to communicating controls to personnel, again, you just want to make sure that the employees are aware of the new way that you're going to do things if you are changing or modifying the controls. And so talks about just different ways that you can provide that communication. Maybe having a quick shift meeting or toolbox meeting, putting it in the email is always great. though not everybody reads their emails. Having a staff meeting, whatever it might be. And then for more complicated processes, it talks about providing training and just different trainings you might need. And again, just that documented information that I mentioned before, making sure that you documented it. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the playbook real quick. So again, in here with the playbook, you've got the same getting it done here. Sorry. So requirements for operation and maintenance controls are intended to help ensure that you've identified significant energy users are operated and maintained to optimal energy performance, that the requirements of ISO 50001 and the ENMS are met, and then action plans for energy improvement projects are successfully implemented. So you, in here, it says we've completed the operational and maintenance controls planning worksheet to establish criterias for items 1A through 1C above. And so there's an additional worksheet that that we can provide you as well that you can look at. So in here, then talks about the portion of the site operation and maintenance control planning worksheet includes specific ranges for operational control parameters, what would be considered significant deviations from normal operations, and then actions taken in case of significant deviation, and just making sure that you've included that. You've got your operational and maintenance controls and criterias are implemented. And then it says once the operational and maintenance controls and criteria are determined and communicated to appropriate personnel, then they must be formally implemented at the point of the energy consumption to ensure the associated equipment and processes is operated in accordance with the criteria. And then it gives some suggested implementation methods or formats. Talks about work instructions, log books or log sheets, like I mentioned before, checklist. Maybe you have a startup checklist that someone has to go through, whatever it might be. And these are just some examples that you can use and develop for the processes you see. It does talk about change management. So, maybe you have a planned change on site when you're gonna talk about things, or maybe you have unplanned changes. And so, just making sure that you've managed for both of those. And so it talks about here an example of an unplanned change in operations of a piece of equipment. Maybe, so it talks about disabling the speed control on a fan's VFD would cause the fan to operate at full speed constantly. And the VFD would not be able to reduce the fan motor speed during periods in which the fan could be lightly loaded. So that might be an unplanned change. Someone went in, accidentally switched it to from controlling to just always on, whatever it might be. So it just talks about what you're going to do for planned changes, what you're going to do for unplanned changes, and then gives a quick example. And then I'm gonna try to quickly open up the sorry, I forgot to open up the other document. Bear with me for a second. So in here, we've got an example of the operational controls planning worksheet. And so in here they have SEU1, which is cooling. And then they have the full description. So you've got building cooling, equipment cooling, and refrigeration. And then who is associated with the SEU. So you've got facilities, you got your central energy plants, your individual buildings, data centers, what processes are going to be associated with cooling. You've got thermodynamics, vapor compression, pumping, what systems. It talks about the chilled water system, condenser water, HVAC, humidity control, controls, implementation or instrumentation. You got your 2 pipes and 4 pipe systems. Those are all just good examples. And then what kind of equipment? Talking about chillers all the way down to VFDs. And then finally you come over here, energy types. Used by this SEU in this example for cooling, it's just electricity. And so as you come through here, brainstorming your operation controls. And so here are just some quick ideas that might be some system or might be some parameters that could impact the energy consumption of this SEU. And so looking at that chilled water return temperature or your chilled water supply temperature, condenser or water supply temperature, thermostat temperatures, as we talked about before. Looking at the, do you have a situation where heating and cooling is happening at the same time within a building? Looking at that control sequence, whatever it might be. These are just some examples, some things to kind of think about. And here, there's some helpful notes too. So, work through the brainstorming exercise with your operation maintenance teams, contractors. In this example, especially with Honeywell, I'm assuming Honeywell was in charge of their controls, and you want to select the parameters for your SEUs. Then it has some additional notes to kind of think about. Again, we've looked at that list before. If you scroll on over, it talks about identifying additional information for selected parameters. So from that other list, they just kind of narrowed it down to 4 here, looking at that chilled water return, chilled water supply, condenser water, and then thermostat settings. And so what pieces of equipment or what pieces of instrumentation are monitoring that? Does it require calibration? What are those units that you want it to be in? What values should it be? And then setting those upper and lower limits that we talked about before. And then it briefly talks about that energy impact trend. So in which case, looking at that return water temperature, if it's returning really high, that means you have a very large cooling load in your facility, and maybe you need to start pumping a little bit more water if you do have the ability to control how much water you're pumping. The lower, if your supply temperature goes down, if you're producing colder water, it takes more energy to produce water that's colder. That's pretty straightforward. Looking at the condenser water reset, if you can provide cooler water, it means that the chiller itself doesn't have to work as hard. And then, thermostat settings, the lower the thermostat setting when you're in cooling, the more energy it's required to cool the space. And then it's got some notes here as well that you can look at. If we go over here to this parameter monitoring, talks about who's going to be in charge of monitoring the parameters, what parameters you want them to look at. Where, so looking at the central energy plants for those chillers, but maybe individual buildings for the thermostats. When do you want to look at it? You want to look at, in this case, they wanted the temperatures to be looked at hourly and the T-set points to be looked at periodically. So, maybe just once every few weeks, having someone go around and make sure that people haven't started messing with those thermostats. And then how are you going to track it? Maybe using that building automation system, maybe having some log sheets. And then it's got some notes here talking about the who, the what, the where, the when, the how, and actions for those data. If I kind of scroll on here, we've got identifying maintenance criteria, and talks about describe the maintenance systems for your SEU, including the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how. So in this example, it says all equipment related to cooling SEUs is properly maintained per manufacturer recommendations. Using the maintenance management system and PM work orders are issued based on periodically of the PM item, and the PM are then scheduled and completed. Preventative maintenance, sorry. Records of the completed preventive maintenance are maintained. And then it just gives some examples. Typical maintenance could include lubrication, filter replacements, tension adjustments, cleaning, etc. And then it talks about communicate to appropriate personnel, the roles who might be affected by this, looking at equipment operators, maintenance technicians, building managers, and operational maintenance are some examples that they looked at, both on-site and contractors. And then what methods are going to be used to make sure you communicated that information. And so this example, they looked at technical training, peer mentoring, class training, shift training, on-job training, etc. Then you want to look at implementing the selected operational control and maintenance criteria. So for each of the selected implementation tools, you want to create the tool if needed, include the tool in documented control. As needed, train personnel on how to use the tool. Start using the tool, collect the data from the tool, follow up to make sure the tool is effective, follow up to make sure the tool is being used properly, and then periodically review and update it as necessary. And then it just talks about different tools that you could look at. Again, work instructions, standard operating procedures, log sheets, logbooks, checklist, etc. And then looking at process for maintaining changes. And so here you're gonna brainstorm with the team what unplanned changes could occur that impact your SEU performance and how will these be avoided. And then when are changes required? And so we'll provide this along with the playbook or along with the playbooks that we have as well, but just some things to kind of think about. And I realize that I'm running short on time, so we're going to go through tasks 18 and 19 relatively quickly. But task 18 is the energy consideration and design. And all task 18 is saying is that we consider energy performance improvement opportunities and operational controls when designing new, modified, or renovated facilities, equipment, systems, and processes. So in other words, if you are designing something new for at your facility, maybe a new line, maybe designing a new process, maybe designing a whole new building, you want to consider energy performance as part of that. So considerations in design, you want to consider energy performance improvement in operations and design of new, modified, and renovated facilities over the lifetime. You want to design the facility to be efficient right from the start and ongoing. And then you want to include these items in your design specifications that are sent out for quote. So one thing I like to tell people often is that the most efficient building is going to be the one that was designed to be efficient on day one. And that to try to bring a building up to a level of energy efficiency that wasn't designed to be efficient on day one, it's going to cost you a lot more money than if you had just designed it to be energy efficient in the beginning. So hopping on over to the playbook, or to the navigator, I'm sorry. In here, again, we consider energy performance improvement opportunities and operational controls when designing new, modified, or renovated sites, equipment, systems, and processes. So you're going to identify the sites, equipment, systems, and processes that can have significant impact on energy performance. You're going to incorporate considerations of energy opportunities and operational controls in the design project. You want to include results of energy performance consideration and specification, design, and procurement activities where applicable, and then you're going to retain record of the results. If we hop on over here to full description, talks about identifying energy uses that have significant impact on energy performance. And, just making sure you keep that in mind. And then really just including that energy performance considerations in your specifications, design and procurement. So once you've gone through here and you've looked at incorporating your considerations and you've answered all these questions, just making sure that you talk to those teams and that you include it in your specifications, you include it in design, you tell the people that you're buying an equipment from, like, hey, this is important to us. Make sure that energy efficiency is included through that design all the way throughout. We've got the playbook here. Again, this is the same as the getting it done. You want to be able to say that you identified the facilities, equipment, systems, and processes that can have significant impact on improvement or energy performance. And that you want to be able to say that the identification is complete. And for energy uses associated with those items mentioned above, they have been identified. So management of operation of your SEUs, achieving the energy objectives, targets, and action plans, and your EMPIs have been identified. You want to incorporate those considerations of energy opportunities and operational controls into design. And then here, there's just kind of a good example of an energy consideration and design worksheet. And so this is an example. In here, this is a project for a new 3-story office building. So in here, they check that it's a new facility and that energy performance is very important to them. So they've included some different aspects and different items looking at office space lighting, the new air-cooled chillers, boilers, and then also the fans and pumps. So not 400 horsepower, but 400 horsepower over all of the fans and pumps. And then again, just retaining that record. And so in here, these are some just different aspects to keep in mind during the design process of energy efficiency. And then finally, the last task we're going to touch on today is energy considerations in procurement. So as part of task 19, we've established energy performance criteria spanning the operating life for purchases affecting energy performance. Inform suppliers that this is a factor in our procurement and define the use and define and use specifications for energy supply purchases. And so just making sure that you tell all of your suppliers, like, hey, energy performance is one of our criteria that we're going to use to evaluate. So some kind of things to think about and specific actions. You want to inform your suppliers that energy performance is one of the things you're going to use to evaluate or factor any SEU related purchases. You're going to establish an operating lifetime energy performance criteria for purchases that can have significant impact. And then finally, you're going to develop a specification for your purchase energy supply and ensuring that the energy performance of procurement of procured equipment and services. So this is why it's really important to make sure that you're including people or talking to people that are outside of your energy team, making sure that the people that are in charge of procurement within your company are aware of why this is so important and that energy performance is something that you want to evaluate. Hopping over to the navigator. So for task 19, we establish energy performance criteria spanning the operating life for purchases affecting energy performance, inform suppliers that this is a factor in procurement, and define and use specifications for energy supply purchases. Here for the getting it done for purchases related to the SEUs, you're going to clearly identify any energy performance related requirements, and then you're going to communicate these requirements to suppliers or service providers and inform them that energy performance is part of your evaluation criteria. You want to evaluate your organization's current procurement processes for items that can significantly impact the energy performance. You want to determine and take any needed actions to adjust existing procurement processes to meet your energy management system requirements. You want to develop a life cycle criteria for specific types of procurement activities that if you do not already have them. You want to develop and communicate specifications for purchase of energy supply and ensuring that energy performance of procured equipment and services. And then finally, you want to determine if any specifications for purchase of energy supplies are applicable to ensure the energy performance of equipment and services purchase. In here, again, inform the suppliers that energy performance is an evaluation. Purchases that might be related to your SEUs. Think about repair parts, maybe you're going to add on to the equipment, maybe need to replace part of the equipment, maybe you have a maintenance service. Any of those things are kind of things to kind of keep in mind. And here, some more of evaluation factors relevant to service providers, things they might want to know. Maybe some things you want to look at is training or certifications from the provider's experience with similar energy uses, just some other things to kind of keep in mind. And then, just some more examples of establishing operating lifetime energy performance criteria. And here it just talks about, it gives you some quick examples as well. And I know I'm very much running out of time. So, hopping over to the playbook very quickly. In here in the playbook, again, it just talks about making sure that energy is included in your procurement. And you got this nice little table here that you can use for creating that kind of life cycle energy performance evaluation worksheet. And so you can complete this and use it to help you kind of keep track of that. And then it's got this nice little procurement checklist here, procurement process checklist of how you can use this checklist to review your organization's current purchasing process for different products or pieces of equipment. And so that's all I have for today. So for polling question number 2 for today, thinking about the tasks that we've gone through 14 through 19, where do you feel your organization is relative to these 6 tasks? Feel free to just answer the polling question. I see that Alyssa has launched it. All right, it looks like we've got kind of a all over the place. We've got some people that are these make sense to my organization, and we have some of these in place, and it wouldn't take too much effort. We got some people that are most of this is new, and we even have some that would basically have to start from scratch, and that's perfectly fine. We're here to help with this. Looking at some review questions, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, but the key theme for today's tasks 14 through 19 is energy always overrides production needs. Energy management is a one and done project. It's best to integrate the energy management system across your site and build a cross-function team. The energy management team alone has enough skill to carry out the ENMS. So feel free to answer what you think it is, A, B, C, or D. All right. Yep, looks like we've got quite a few responses. Yes, it is C. It's best to integrate your ENMS across your site and build a cross-function team. Question 2 for task 14, competence and training. Competence is defined as following what your boss says without question, having the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve the intended results. Getting the job done ASAP without regard to safety or environmental impacts, or having a 4-year degree in the applicable field of study. Um, Yep, looks like we have quite a few responses, and everybody said B, that is correct, having the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. Question 3, it is not an ISO 50001 requirement that organizations shall have a process for employees and contractors to make comments and suggestions. True or false? Correct. It is false. It is a requirement that you have that suggestion box. Question 4. Operational controls must be planned and implemented for all energy consuming systems on site, only systems that require detailed periodic maintenance, SEUs and action plans, or electric motors. So, operational controls must be planned and implemented for which of the following? All right. Yeah, that's correct. Most people said the SEUs and action plans. So you want to make sure your operational controls are planned for your SEUs and action plans. Question 5. It's not enough to just identify operational controls. These must be communicated to responsible personnel. True or false? Yep, that's correct. Everybody said true. So it's not enough to just identify them. You want to make sure that the people who are responsible know about them. Question 6. Operational controls form a broad base of the energy success pyramid and are are the beginning of the process to achieve your organization's energy policy. True or false? Yep, that is correct. It is true. The operational controls build that broad base, and hopefully you'll it's the beginning to achieving your organization's energy policy. Question 7. Design criteria that support energy improvements do not need to be included in your design specifications for new equipment or facilities. Correct. False. You do want to make sure that you're including those. And then finally, question 8. Which of the following are related to 50,001 Ready Task 19 for energy consideration and procurement? You want to develop specifications as needed for the purchase of energy. You want to establish a process to include life cycle performance criteria on purchased items that can significantly impact your energy performance. You want to inform suppliers that your organization uses energy performance to evaluate quotes, or all of the above. Yep, that is correct. Everybody said D, all of the above. You do want to include all of those. So, really briefly looking ahead, today we talked about tasks 14 through 19, and that's all about the support and operations. Next week, not next week, next month, we're only going to be touching on 2. We'll be looking at the monitoring and measurement of your EMS, and then monitor and measurement of your energy performance improvement. So that's going to be all about the checking. We kind of briefly mentioned them when we were talking about operational controls today. So for the training schedule today, we went through the engaging other functions. Next time we'll be talking about evaluating performance, and that's going to be on October the 4th. Some things to kind of work on from session 5. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and download those blank playbooks for tasks 14 through 19. And review the Army examples that we'll be sending out to you. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and continue to work on those playbooks 1 through 13. And during our next one-on-one calls, we'll be reviewing tasks 14 through 19, as well as checking on any of those tasks 1 through 13 as you guys want to go over them. Again, this is just our one-on-one call schedule. I apologize, that should say Wednesday. And our next calls will be in 2 weeks from today. And to prepare for session 6, if you want to look ahead, go ahead and look at that Getting It Done tab for tasks 20 and 21 in the Navigator and downloading those blank playbooks. And some things to kind of think about or keep in mind for session 6. Do you currently evaluate your energy performance year over year, and how are you doing that? Are significant deviations from your planned energy performance investigated? And is monitoring and measuring to evaluate your ENMS and energy performance well defined? Last polling question, if I have anybody still on the call, looking at, after listening to today's webinar, session 5, and having now covered tasks 1 through 19, how do you feel about implementation of your ENMS? Anywhere from still overwhelmed to ready to get ready, or hopefully nobody is in the Houston, we have a problem. All right. Oh no. Oh, awesome. For a second, Andy, I thought your response was Houston, we have a problem, but no, you're ready to get ready. Yeah, so we got people ranging from ready to get ready to overwhelmed but feeling a little bit better. So you know, it's completely understandable that people are going to kind of be all over the place, and we're here to help. And hopefully we can get you out of that overwhelmed into the encouraged or ready to get ready phase. So thank you guys. That's all I have for today. Myself and Mike can hang on for a minute if you guys have any questions. I do realize that I went over by a little bit, but feel free to reach out to us if you need, or feel free to stay on the line and ask us any questions if you have any, or reach out to us. And here's our information, phone numbers, email, whatever you need. That's all I have for today. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, we're good. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.